This month sees the deadline for responses to the government's white paper on criminal justice. In part, it's an attempt to reduce the numbers of inmates in Britain's increasingly overcrowded prisons, which is a cause for concern among people from all sides of the political spectrum. Tonight, in a special extended report, the media show looks at the access prisoners get to radio, newspapers and television that the rest of us take for granted. We surveyed 40 prisons and visited 4, from a young offenders institution to a high-security prison housing long-term offenders, interviewing officers and inmates about what they get to see, read and hear. Reading papers and watching TV in prison could help to reduce the isolation and despair felt by many of the inmates. But how far are they denied this vital link with the outside world?
You get that feeling when the door shuts behind you. You've never been in prison before, you've never been locked up before. You do feel it, and it's a horrible feeling. You think, what am I doing in there?
We have the despair, we have the self-mutilation, we have the suicide attempts, we have the crying, we have the smashing up, which is all indicative of people who are in, a great deal of despair.
A lot of people think that prison's easy, but it's not easy when you think about it, because you're locked up all the time. Most of these prisoners in here are locked up 23 hours a day. They only get an hour's exercise, and they're just looking at the walls all the time and staring at the ceiling.
I think leaving people in overcrowded cells with pots is bad enough, but if you're going to also give them nothing to do, or an adequate amount to do, and nothing constructive by way of training, then I think you're setting up trouble for the future.
Association time, the time prisoners have to mix with one another, is strictly limited. In most cases, it's no more than an hour or 2 each day. At worst, in understaffed local prisons, it can be as little as 1 hour a week. With such restrictions, it's easy to lose touch.
You lose touch with the outside completely, various things, whether it's politics, entertainment, sport, racing. It says a lot.
With prisoners stuck in their cells for most of the day, the radio is a vital link. 4 out of 5 prisoners own a radio, although only in the last few months have they been allowed to listen to stations on the FM band.
Radio's quite good at relieving boredom when you're laying in your cell at night and you've got nothing to do, because you do get fed up with reading after a few hours. So you listen to the radio, you can just sit and space off and listen to the radio.
The cost of such comfort is high. Batteries cost 70p out of an average weekly wage of £2.50. But many are prepared to pay the price.
If you're alone in a cell and you've got a radio, you're not alone really. But whereas in the paper, you really are alone,
You always keep up to date in the papers, because you always hear about different cases, what are going on, and it makes your time sort of go easy, because you think, oh, I remember that case 3 or 4 months ago. Makes things easier.
Like all forms of media, the provision of newspapers in prison is seen not as a right, but as a privilege. Even so, the supply of papers is much more restricted than radios. Inmates can only buy 1 daily newspaper, paid for either from their wages or by someone on the outside. If they can't afford that, the prison does supply a limited number of papers. But our survey showed it amounted to less than 1 paper for every 30 prisoners.
There's a lot of people that can't afford a paper, and they won't get to see a paper for weeks unless they put themselves about and, they really want to see something in that paper. They have to go and borrow it off of somebody else, because they won't get it. Just, you have to go and get a newspaper from the library. Second-hand magazine they might be able to get, that's about it. I doubt if even half the prison gets a daily paper.
Well, I don't like reading The Sun that much, but I'd rather read The Mirror than that. But if they give you The Sun, you ain't got no choice.
Yeah.
Unless, you get your own paper sent in.
Yeah.
If you get your own, and sometimes when you get your paper sent in, it arrives 11 o'clock in the afternoon, and you don't get it until 6, 7 o'clock in the evening.
If there was sufficient access to the inverted commas quality newspapers, or any of the quality documentaries that are shown on telly, but as prisoners we've got no access to that. We like the Sun, Star and the mail and all that rhetoric comes in. And it's all the page 3 stuff, and that's emphasised to us, and a lot of us don't, believe it or not, a lot of prisoners don't want to look at that. They want to read what's going on out there. They want to keep their communication with that out there. The documentaries on television, they're not on till gone 9 o'clock, and as I said before, 10 to 9, our television stops in this particular prison.
Just adjusting the television, Mr. McCoy.
Put the set above your head.
Yes, it's the vertical halter.
Hey, look! We've got a picture.
It's the most powerful medium, television, which generates the most argument. Television in prison is watched in designated rooms, with the TV set tuned permanently to one channel. In some prisons, the limited supply of sets means that the minority channels BBC 2 and Channel 4 are simply not available. In any case, since the introduction of video, most prisoners will sit and watch a film rather than the TV.
For a lot of them, it's escapism. You know, like you put documentaries on, some of them are not interested, some are, they relate to crime a lot. They want the series they watch, the Sweeney, they keep watching them, Miami Vice and all that. The films, they like a bit of violence, a bit of laugh and all that. Mainly at the weekends watching the videos, it's escapism for them.
But what about the effects of TV violence on younger prisoners? Feltham is a remand and young offenders institution a few miles from London's Heathrow Airport. Here there are almost 900 prisoners aged between 14 and 21. Prison Governor Joe Whitty came to Feltham last year after 3 years at one of Britain's toughest high-security prisons, Long Lartin. He's concerned about television's influence on his younger charges.
Most of them would see their role models as being glamorous, plenty of money, Jack the Lad, the hard man, the successful con, when by definition that is the one thing that they're not.
They're youngsters that from the age of 7 have been affected. They enact very much what they've seen and what on the media, and they're, say, tomorrow's big-time thugs, because they've been through it all, and they've been so hardened and so dehumanised by the processes and things they've been through that it produces those kind of caricatures that you display.
The most popular movies in prison are action films like Rambo, Red Heat and Cyborg. How much of this is what the prisoners actually want, and how much is what the officers choose to give them, is an open question. But neither side seems particularly happy with the results.
They've seen their heroes, Stallone and all that, punching the old brick wall. They used to punch the glass, because 9 times out of 10 they usually wind up with masses of blood. They're screaming, "Oh, look at all that, go back!" You know, you whiz them down the hospital. A number of times that they used to put their fist through the glass for reenactment.
The emphasis now on entertainment is all in a kind of violent mode, or an action mode, or an excitement mode. You tell me how much of your life is full of action and excitement, and how much is dull, mundane, dreary, monotony. And it's crazy to give such a diet that you've got to be living on some kind of hype. You know, we've stuck a needle in your arm and you're living at 90 miles an hour for all your life, because you ain't.
It's the officers who choose what films to put on the telly. It's up to us if you want to sit down and watch it, or we want to do other things in the time.
There's a library of videos, and it's them all the time, They just go through them, round and round, it's like a circle.
I'll feel that.
You just see them all over and over again. It's mostly action films, isn't it?
Mostly action films and
Arnold Schwarzenegger, them sort of films. Nothing that's got a sort of storyline, so it's just full of action and violence, and well, that's the sort of things people want to watch in here, you know.
I have seen prisoners affected by particularly porno-type videos, which unfortunately have been shown in prison. And whether it's been people violent or with a propensity towards sexual offence, I have actually seen responses within men that really we ought not to encourage. My personal experience of coming through the institution one night, was to actually be standing at the back of the TV room just in time to see a young lady coming up to orgasm with obviously a degree of sexual intercourse taking place. That was certainly having an impact with the youngsters. In terms of what we actually show them, particularly from the video market, I think that we have to be extremely cautious and particularly sensible about it.
I mean, all these videos are actually pushing out these particular values and particular ethics, and they're usually violent and reactionary and sexist and racist. And it's not very healthy for people in prison, I think, to be exposed to that sort of ideology. But unfortunately, whenever attempts have been made to put on more intelligent, progressive sort of videos, we haven't been able to manage.
Nonetheless, violent films can be used in prison with surprising results. Ghosts of the Civil Dead is a remarkable Australian film based on a real-life breakdown in order at a maximum security prison. While at Long Lartin, Joe Whitty showed the film in all its brutal violence to the long-term inmates there.
I wanted to show the film Ghosts of the Living Dead to men in Long Lartin because I thought it was particularly appropriate. It showed a high degree of violence in a prison situation, which was quite horrifying. But also within that film, there are all the elements which I believe lead to riot and disorder in prisons. And in many ways, I wanted to show it to men in Long Lartin because I believe most people in Long Lartin show a degree of responsibility, which is why I exposed them and allowed them to use the media in a fairly wide way.
And it had an enormous impact, basically because it reproduced on screen a lot of the experiences that most of us were intimately sort of connected with, yeah. It had a very powerful effect, yeah. It was probably the first film I'd ever seen about prison that actually dealt with the reality of prison, as opposed to glamorising it or distorting it.
I saw many men affected by the violence in there, to the extent that one man actually left, stating that he just couldn't take any of it.
They're the best music bars you've ever tasted.
Why are they turning the TVs off? You don't turn someone's TV off when he's stuck in his cell all day. You're asking for something to happen when you come at stuff like that.
The actual deprivation as a means of control, it's a frightening thought if that's the way future prisons go, and there's a lot of rhetoric going around, and that is the way the, what do they call it? The
New generation
prisons. That's the way they're going to be. Well, that's inhuman.
In high-security prisons in America and in some European countries, prisoners have television sets in their own cells. It's an idea which has its attractions. One study in France showed that TV in cells had a dramatic effect, reducing the use of drugs and suicide. Our survey of British prisons showed strong support for introducing such schemes here.
It seems to me that individual cell television, where prisoners are in their cells for a very long part of the day and night, would be a great assistance on control problems of staff. It would prevent prisoners getting into a dazed state where from time to time you get people who don't know if it's day or night. It would also aid in the whole program of education and training and keeping people abreast of what's going on.
I personally would think that, particularly for long-termers, then TV in cells I would welcome. I think it's a good control element, it's an informative element. Many people, particularly long-termers, they need the degree of privacy to have their own rooms, to have their own world, to be able to perhaps invite somebody in to watch TV.
I don't want prisoners to come out from long sentences unable to cross the road because they've forgotten about traffic, haven't seen a motor car for years, haven't any idea of how to shop and use money properly, no proper pre-release course. Well now, if they've been watching television from time to time in the cell, they master all that and it doesn't arise.
But for prisoners, the prospect of having a television in their cells is at best a mixed blessing.
I think if I had a TV and music, I wouldn't want to come out. That's right. Because, I mean, you've got everything you want. The only time I come out is to get my food and go back in.
There's no need to come out, is there?
If they introduce televisions in cell, they'll curtail evening association or at least reduce it. We'd obviously like televisions in cell because it does give us a great degree of choice over what we're watching. What we are concerned about is that the right to associate, which isn't a privilege, it's an important human right, and it's been fought for. It was never given to us, it was fought for by prisoners coming together to fight for more association, more access to each other. Now, if it means that that's got to be sacrificed for televisions in cells, then I would say we'd rather do without televisions in cells.
And it's not really an issue as well at the end of the day, because the Home Office are going to give us televisions, but for the wrong reasons, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Mainly so that they can cut down on the staffing hours and bang us up for longer periods of time.
Without a doubt, I mean, we criticise the media, but I mean, I wouldn't be without the television, because it's one of the biggest boons I think we've had in prisons for years. Over the years, the general work has well, it's not deteriorated, it's gone, it's left. Most big prisons in the Londons particularly used to have workshops. Now there's very little left. So we're resorting to whatever we can dream up. In the meantime, I must confess that the television is certainly, in my view, an exceptionally good thing. I wouldn't be without it.
It's a drug.
Yeah, I wouldn't
It's a
definitely.
mass
What
drug.
can we do? What can we do in the meantime?
It's become a device in
quite
prison,
fine.
to be very honest with you. It's a device in prison, don't give them anything else, just stick them in front of a box and it's a drug.
But media in prison could be used to everybody's benefit. Leyhill is one of 8 open prisons in the country. It houses 400 prisoners ranging from lifers at the end of their sentence to petty criminals serving just a few months. Provision of media here is much more liberal than in other prisons. The library and reading areas are well stocked with papers. There are 4 TV channels and a different video every night chosen by the prisoners. But they don't just read and watch more here than they do in other prisons. They're actively involved in using computers, video and printing presses. They write, design and print their own newspaper, the Leyhill News. It carries stories about what's going on inside the prison and also provides a platform for prisoners' concerns. Neil, serving a life sentence, is the current editor.
Having served 13 years this year, coming to Leyhill is a very important point because it was going to allow me to integrate into society. And not only that, it was going to allow me to do something like becoming the editor of the Leyhill News, which would allow me to meet different people from all walks of society, whether I was interviewing them or they were interviewing me.
About 8 months ago, 3 prisoners at Leyhill formed The Offenders, a pop group designed to raise cash for a local hospice. With the help of a video, the group gained wide publicity in the press and on radio.
The coverage we had enabled other people to find jobs, believe it or not, because people saw us on the TV, employers, would-be employers, and realised that Leyhill is a progressive prison. And I think people realised that we're not all covered in tattoos, and we haven't all got broken noses, and we're just ordinary people who, for a myriad of reasons, have ended up in prison.
In the past, prisons have had this air of mystique, where people, it's all secret and behind closed doors. I mean, Leyhill being an open prison hasn't a wall anyway, but it's still nonetheless a prison. We make a point of inviting people into the prison to look at what Leyhill's all about. Leyhill is the way to say, okay, with the help of contacts outside, built up through media contacts, the positive job offers and things that we've had through press coverage, this is the way forward. We should be looking at the progressive way of Leyhill rather than negatives.
The hype that Leyhill's getting is for a very good cause, because it's showing, as far as I'm concerned, it's showing the outside how a prison ought to be run.
But such an open policy carries risks. Prisons like Leyhill have been attacked in the press for being too soft.
The public don't see the true inside. They only see the glossy thing, oh, a man's got a colour television or a portable television in his cell, he's got a budgie and all that. But the public want to realise what it's really like. We may have all these things, but they're superficial.
Being in prison still is a pretty dreadful experience, in spite of the media hype, which insists on portraying some prisoners as being something akin to holiday camp. It isn't.